Jennifer, you may be America's answers to Sherlock Holmes, but do you think you could handle a mystery whose trail is 200 years old?
That's pretty long ago, Uncle Basil. I doubt anyone cares about it now.
On the contrary, my dear Jennifer, there's a 2-century-old fortune in gold riding on the answer to this one. Hop by the Phaeton Club with me, and I'll explain the details.
Wow, maybe for once Uncle Basil wasn't kidding. That sure looks like a fortune in gold.
The letter in the box of gold that Marcus found is actually a 200-year-old tontine agreement. Can you imagine? A tontine from the 1700s.
What is a tontine, Uncle Basil? I've never heard that word before.
A tontine is an agreement that a group of people sign. It says a certain sum of money or a valuable item will be inherited by the last surviving member of the group. Who knows where the soldiers got the money, but somehow they decided only one of them should have it. Perhaps they felt that they might all be killed in battle, and the tontine was a kind of prize to keep them going. In any case, they all agreed to leave this chest of gold for whichever one of them survived the longest. Marcus has done quite a bit of research in the last week, and he discovered all but 3 of the men were killed in the Revolutionary War at the Battle of Cowpens, North Carolina. The 3 men that survived the war were John Page, Thomas Blench, and Samuel Mantlet. Marcus believes he's tracked down their descendants, and he sent them looking for letters or records that would help us discover when each of the survivors died. Mr. Blench said that he had to do some research in an old building on Quaint Street. Miss Mantlet left a message that says she's found something over at Westminster Abbey. And Mr. Page just called from Madame Tussaud's Wax Museum. Would you help us out by catching up with each of them and seeing what they have found?
Sure thing, Uncle Baz. We're on our way.
Marvelous to have you come to our aid, Jennifer. I'm confident that you can be of great assistance in this investigation. Last week, the Phaeton Club voted to extend our wine cellar by knocking down one of our basement walls. When we demolished the brick wall, we found this chest. Apparently, it was walled up in this site over 200 years ago by a regiment of King George III's men just before they went off to fight the rebellious American colonists. With the gold inside the chest was a tontine, an agreement that says all the gold belongs to the last surviving member of the regiment and his descendants. Of course, the Phaeton Club has made every effort to track down the descendants of every man in the regiment, so that we can return the gold to its rightful owner. But that's not so easy to suss out. We need to find out which of the men in the regiment lived longer than all the others. I've rung up old Sneed at the British Library, and he said he'd start putting together some information about that time in history. He also mentioned that the Imperial War Museum recently opened a traveling exhibit of Revolutionary War artifacts from America. You may want to pop by and have a look at that.
Look at how fancy they used to write in those days. But see how the letter is covered in splotches of ink? Markers and ballpoint pens weren't invented in those days, so they had to write by dipping sharpened feathers called quills in ink. It was messy. Madame Tussaud's may be just a tourist attraction, but it's been around for over 200 years. They're pretty careful to get all their history right. Let's see what Mr. Page came up with here. The guidebook says that Madame Tussaud herself was alive during the French Revolution. This wax model was made from a plaster cast called the death mask of Marie Antoinette's actual head. Madame Tussaud was there in Paris in 1793 when King Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette were executed. She made imprints of the king and queen's faces right after they'd been beheaded by the guillotine. Yikes, that is so gross. That lady must have had nerves of steel. No way would I ever do that. But since she did, today, 200 years later, we know exactly what Marie Antoinette and Louis XVI looked like.
Ah, hello. You're Basil's niece, Jennifer, correct? I wish I could tell you that I found the date that my ancestor, John Page, died, but I'm afraid it seems impossible to trace. Sadly, my family has not kept very good records on even our most recent lives, let alone the lives of our 200-year-old relatives. And there's nothing in the legal registries. But I did find one clue, in a trunk of family heirlooms kept by my grandmother's grandmother. It's a marvelous treasure trove, full of knickknacks and interesting bits of history. I rooted through the whole thing and found this old medallion. I cleaned it off with a bit of silver polish and found an inscription on the back. Have a look.
Doesn't it freak you out when you think that some of these buildings were built before our country was founded? England is so much older than America.
Luckily for me, my family's very proud of its past. It's been a tradition to keep letters, diaries and photographs of our ancestors and hand them down from parent to child so that they'll never be lost.
Does your family have a famous background or something, Mr. Blench?
Not really, Jennifer. Just because your family isn't wealthy or famous doesn't mean that its history shouldn't be important to you. I loved reading the diary left us by one of my mother's ancestors in the mid-1800s. It didn't mention any famous poets or painters or Queen Victoria, but it was full of charming stories about her life and the lives of her children. More precious to me than any gold, I assure you. I searched through trunks and trunks of our family's oldest things till I found this box of letters. They were written sometime after the Revolutionary War. This one was written by the wife of Thomas Blench, the soldier who signed the Tontine. In the letter, she's very sad about her husband's death. Unfortunately, it's not dated.
This is kind of hard to read. Let me see if I can make it out. It says, "My dear Rebecca, your letter brightened my day in this dark time. Since the death of my beloved husband this spring, I feel the year has grown bleak. The troubles in France are too distressing to think on. I feel sure that Thomas would have been amazed had he lived to see King Louis and Marie Antoinette lose their heads to the peasant mob. God forfend that such harm should come to our beloved King George." It goes on a little about sending her love to the family and stuff. Then it's signed, "Yours with God's blessings, Mrs. Thomas Blench." This letter doesn't have a date on it, but it does tell us that Thomas Blench died the same year that King Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette of France were beheaded. Excuse me, Mr. Sneed. Marcus Amesbury from the Phaeton Club just sent us over to do some research about events in the late 1700s. Do you have any idea where we should start?
According to the excitable Mr. Amesbury, you two need to know a bit about what was going on here in Europe around the time of that colonial uprising you call the American Revolution. I noticed that the Imperial War Museum is having a special exhibit on that particular rebellion, so I trust you'll pop by there to study up. In the meantime, I've gone through our vast history section and put together some of the highlights of events on this side of the Atlantic. It was quite an exciting time in Europe's history, as you'll see.
Wow, what a wild life Napoleon had. General, emperor, then a prisoner on a scrawny little island. I wonder which English king ruled when Napoleon was emperor of France. Let's check our chart of kings and find out. Check your chart of monarchs to find out who ruled England in 1804 when Napoleon crowned himself emperor of France. That's right. King George III ruled England while Napoleon was emperor of France. There sure was a lot going on during George III's reign. This would probably be a good place to find out when someone died, if they were really famous. Lots of famous people are buried here. But how will we find out about any of the Tontine soldiers here?
I've been searching and searching for any kind of record that my family might have kept over the years. One of the few precious heirlooms that my family has held for hundreds of years is the family Bible. It was kept in an old trunk in my grandfather's attic until he lent it to the rector here at Westminster. The rector was doing a study on old Bible editions. I just borrowed it back. No one in our family has looked at it for generations, but when I opened up to the front page, I found that notes had been scribbled in it, like an old ledger. In the past, families often kept records like that in the family Bible. They noted down events that seemed important to them, like births, deaths, and what appeared to be important historical events. That way, the family had a kind of little history of its own. I couldn't make out all of it, because the writing is so old it had faded away completely in places. I did manage to find the name Samuel Mantlet. The mention was a notation of his death, but frustratingly enough, the date was rubbed out. The only thing that might help to figure it out was a mention of an event that also happened that year. The death notice was written on the same line as the words, "Bastille prison stormed by mob, Paris."
Here's the Revolutionary War exhibit Mr. Amesbury told us about. How weird to think that England and America fought a big war once. I always think of the English as being on our side. All that research can pay off now. Pick the clues that show which of the Tontine's members' descendants should inherit the gold. trail that'll lead us to the gold's rightful owner. Now point out which descendant should get the revolutionary riches. You got it! Mr. Page's family should receive the gold because John Page outlived all the other members of the Tontine. According to the Tontine, whichever signer lived longer than all the others should have inherited all the gold. Mr. Amesbury told us that the only members of the Tontine who survived the American Revolution were John Page, Samuel Mantlet, and Thomas Blench. According to our family Bible, Miss Mantlet's ancestor, Samuel Mantlet, died in the same year that the people of Paris stormed the Bastille prison, 1789. Mr. Blench found a letter that said that his ancestor, Thomas Blench, died in the same year that King Louis XVI of France and Marie Antoinette were beheaded, 1793. But Mr. Page's ancestor, John Page, died at the Battle of Waterloo. That battle wasn't until 1815, so he outlived all the other members. The gold goes to Mr. Page's family.